The story begins in the stillness of a quiet suburban evening, where the air feels almost too calm, too staged, as if holding its breath before a storm. Ethan, a man in his late 20s, sits motionless behind the wheel of his car parked outside his modest apartment. From the outside, it could appear like an ordinary moment, someone pausing before heading inside, but the weight in his chest makes this anything but routine. Ethan is the type who works hard, who has been faithful, loyal, and quietly ambitious, yet lately he feels the grind wearing at him. He stares at the glow of the apartment window, unease gnawing at him in ways he cannot articulate. Something is off. Madison, his girlfriend, has been emotionally distant these past few weeks, her sharp wit turning into sharp edges, her warmth replaced with a cool detachment that Ethan has tried to rationalize as stress or tiredness. He taps his fingers against the steering wheel, debating. Should he just go inside, shrug off the nagging pit in his stomach? Or should he keep driving, spare himself whatever truth might be lurking behind those walls? That hesitation, that pause, says everything. Ethan's gut already knows the storm he's about to walk into, but hope is a cruel tether. For one last moment, he lingers, unaware that these few seconds of silence are the final breaths of the world he once knew. When Ethan finally musters the will to step out of the car and unlock the apartment door, the quiet familiarity of home feels strangely alien. He notices the faint hum of music, the muffled sound of laughter, and something inside him sharpens with dread. Moving down the hallway, each step is heavy, yet the sounds ahead grow clearer, too intimate, too carefree to be harmless. He stops outside the bedroom, the door slightly ajar, and what he sees cuts deeper than any blade. Madison, the woman he has loved and trusted, lies tangled in sheets, her hair a mess of passion, her body pressed against Ryan, his best friend since childhood, his brother in all but blood. Their laughter dies instantly when their eyes meet his. The world slows, stretching each second into eternity. Madison's face drains of color, her gasp piercing the air like glass shattering. Ryan stammers, fumbling for words, his reckless charm evaporating into raw guilt. For Ethan, however, there is no explosion, no theatrical outburst. Instead, silence fills him, thick, suffocating, more devastating than any scream. His chest tightens, breath shallow, eyes burning not with rage, but with heartbreak so profound it steals his voice. The betrayal is total, not just a lover's infidelity, but the shattering of trust from the one person he thought would never cross that line. Two worlds collapse at once, his relationship and his oldest friendship, and all Ethan can do is stand there, hollowed out by disbelief. In that unbearable silence, Ethan finally speaks, but not with fury. His voice is low, raw, and trembling with a weight heavier than anger could ever be. Of all the people, Ryan? The words fall into the room like a verdict, final and unanswerable. They hang in the air, suffocating both Madison and Ryan, who have no defense, no excuse strong enough to erase what Ethan has just witnessed. He doesn't stay to hear their stuttered explanations. Instead, he turns, his movements slow, deliberate, as if he's walking through water. The betrayal isn't just seen, it's branded into him, carved into his memory with brutal clarity. He steps out of the apartment, leaving behind the fragments of a life he thought he knew. Outside, the cool night air slams into him, offering no comfort. His body moves on autopilot, sliding back into the driver's seat, starting the car, and pulling away, though he has no destination in mind. He drives aimlessly, past neon signs, through empty streets, down highways that blur in the darkness, his hands clenched on the wheel while his heart feels like it's unraveling thread by thread. Every mile stretches the distance between him and the betrayal, yet the image follows him relentlessly. Madison's gasp, Ryan's guilt-ridden face, the intimacy that should have been his alone. No tears come, only a hollow ache, a numbness that frightens him more than rage ever could. The audience is left with the haunting picture of Ethan drifting through the night, his world imploded, his foundation gone. This isn't the kind of betrayal that screams, it's the kind that buries itself deep, festering in silence. And it is that silence, more than anything, that grips us and pulls us into his story, demanding we follow to see what he'll do next. Ethan's life, up until the night of betrayal, looked like a steady climb toward the future he had always envisioned for himself. Fresh from landing a demanding position at a prestigious law firm, he was determined to prove that he belonged in a world fueled by ambition, intellect, and long hours. The pressure was immense, late nights buried in case files, early mornings drafting briefs, but he carried it with quiet resilience, telling himself that the sacrifices were worth it. His story wasn't just about career, it was about loyalty, roots, and the people who shaped him. Ryan, his best friend since middle school, had been a constant in his life. Where Ryan was impulsive and reckless, Ethan was cautious and steady, the balance that kept them tethered. Through adolescence and young adulthood, they were inseparable, two halves of a brotherhood forged by time, laughter, and survival. Madison entered Ethan's orbit in college, when the future still felt wide open. She wasn't just beautiful, but sharp-minded and ambitious in ways that matched his own. For Ethan, who had weathered the grief of losing his father too young, Madison became more than a girlfriend. She was his anchor, the stability that allowed him to breathe again when the world seemed unstable. Between Ryan and Madison, Ethan believed he had found his circle, his family by choice, the rare trust that comes once in a lifetime. These were the people he trusted most, the ones who filled the voids life had left in him. And so, when he worked late nights at the firm, when exhaustion threatened to consume him, it was the thought of their unwavering presence that kept him moving forward. He never imagined they were already weaving cracks into the foundation he leaned on so heavily. Yet even in this carefully constructed life, small cracks began to appear, tiny moments that Ethan's heart registered but his mind dismissed. Madison had always been ambitious, and her late nights out with friends were, at first, easy to rationalize. She'd claim it was networking, unwinding, or catching up with old classmates, and Ethan, too wrapped in his own demanding schedule, accepted it at face value. But recently, those nights felt more frequent, her explanations thinner, her presence at home more like a ghost than a partner. Ryan, too, had grown strangely distant. The same friend who once showed up unannounced with pizza and a six-pack now seemed to keep Ethan at arm's length. Conversations that used to stretch into the early hours dwindled into short, half-hearted exchanges. Ethan felt it, an invisible gap widening between him and the two people he trusted most, but he brushed it aside as exhaustion, stress, or his own paranoia. His gut whispered unease, yet he silenced it with logic. Madison had stood by him during his father's death. Ryan had carried him through the loneliness of adolescence. They wouldn't betray him. They couldn't. The idea was unthinkable, even insulting to the trust he had given them. Still, there were moments, lingering looks. An unexplained tension in the air that struck him like static shocks, small warnings of a storm he refused to acknowledge. He told himself love and friendship were stronger than suspicion. But those seeds of doubt, left unattended, began to root themselves deep, waiting for the day truth would rip them into the open. When the betrayal finally shattered Ethan's world, what cut deepest wasn't just the act itself, but the realization of how blind he had been to the signs. In the aftermath, as he replayed memories in an endless loop, he saw how often he had ignored his instincts, how foolishly he had chosen trust over confrontation. That blindness, born of love and loyalty, now mocked him. Yet Ethan did not share his pain with those around him. At work, he wore his professionalism like armor, burying his turmoil beneath meticulous briefs and quiet diligence. His colleagues saw only a young associate working tirelessly to climb the ladder, unaware of the fracture spreading inside him. At home, his mother, Laura, remained a warm and steady presence, always eager to check in on her son. She sensed his weariness but mistook it for career stress, not heartbreak. Ethan never corrected her. He didn't have the words, nor the strength, to expose how deeply he'd been gutted. The truth sat in his chest like a stone, unspoken and corrosive, isolating him further. To admit it aloud to his mother, his co-workers, or even himself would mean facing the reality that the two people who had defined his world had chosen each other over him. So he held it in, quietly unraveling behind closed doors. What the world saw was a man with promise, a young lawyer with ambition. What they didn't see was the silence he carried home each night, the way his own memories betrayed him, and the suffocating isolation of knowing his pain had no safe place to land. This unspoken loneliness set the stage for Ethan's journey, not just of betrayal, but of rediscovery, forcing him to confront the question of who he was when stripped of the people he thought he could not live without. Days pass like a blur before Ethan finally forces himself to confront Madison. He has rehearsed the conversation 100 times in his head, but when she opens the door, the words falter. Her face, composed and almost irritated, cuts deeper than any display of guilt could. Sitting across from her in the living room they once shared, Ethan asks the question directly, his voice steady, but heavy with desperation. Was it just a mistake, Madison? Tell me the truth. She doesn't flinch. Instead, she exhales slowly, as though tired of carrying a secret she no longer feels the need to protect. Her eyes meet his, cold and unblinking, and she says she's confused. She claims she doesn't know what she wants anymore, that Ethan has been too consumed by work, too lost in his career to notice her drifting away. The words sting because they twist his devotion into neglect, reframing his sacrifice as failure. Madison doesn't beg for forgiveness, doesn't fight for them, she simply places the weight on him, as if her betrayal were the natural consequence of his ambition. For Ethan, it is a second betrayal layered atop the first, not just the act of infidelity, but the refusal to even acknowledge its devastation. Later that night, Ryan appears, restless and guilt-ridden, unable to leave things as they are. He corners Ethan outside his apartment, desperation etched in every gesture. "It just happened," Ryan blurts, his voice cracking under the strain. He insists it was meaningless, a mistake that grew out of weakness, and he begs Ethan to believe him, to forgive him, to salvage something from the wreckage. But Ethan listens in silence, his expression unreadable, his heart breaking all over again, not because of Ryan's words, but because of what he finally understands between the lines. This wasn't a single lapse, a reckless night they regretted. The way Ryan speaks, the way his eyes dart away, the way guilt hangs heavier than surprise, it all tells Ethan the truth. This has been going on for months, a betrayal woven into his everyday life while he worked, while he trusted, while he celebrated small victories with them both. Every late night Madison claimed to be out with friends, every time Ryan grew distant, they weren't coincidences. They were cover. And standing before the man he once called brother, Ethan realizes that the friendship he thought indestructible has already died. Nothing Ryan says can change that. Forgiveness feels not just impossible, but meaningless. When the weight of both confessions finally settles, Ethan makes his decision not in anger, but in a clarity born of devastation. He cuts ties with Ryan, his voice low but final, "We're done. Whatever we were, it's over." To Madison, he offers no plea, no second chance. Their relationship, once the center of his world, has been reduced to ashes in a single night. The double loss guts him in a way words cannot capture. His girlfriend and his best friend, two pillars of his life, have collapsed at once, leaving only a hollow space where love and trust once lived. That night, Ethan doesn't sleep. He sits at his desk with a notebook open, a pen in his trembling hand, trying to make sense of the wreckage. Words spill onto the page, not polished thoughts, but raw fragments of heartbreak, rage, disbelief. Journaling becomes his only release, the one place he can admit how broken he feels without fear of judgment. Each entry is a confession to himself, a record of the wound no one else sees. And though he doesn't know it yet, this ritual marks the beginning of a new path. The life he knew, the safety net of Ryan's loyalty, the comfort of Madison's presence, has been stripped away. All that remains is the silence of his apartment and the ink on the page. The betrayal is no longer a wound he can ignore, it is the irreversible turning point that forces him into uncharted territory. Alone, abandoned, Ethan's story truly begins the weeks after the breakup. Ethan discovers that betrayal doesn't stay neatly tucked behind closed doors, it leaks, spreads, and mutates. What he thought would remain a private heartbreak becomes public currency among his circle of friends. Whispers ripple through their group chats, stories get twisted, and suddenly Ethan is cast not as the wounded, but as the overdramatic. Some, unwilling to face the ugliness of Madison and Ryan's choices, frame Ethan as the one who overreacted, painting his silence and withdrawal as bitterness instead of pain. Others, perhaps too eager to stay in Madison and Ryan's orbit, side with them openly, offering thin excuses like things happen or you can't control love. To Ethan, each rumor feels like a fresh betrayal, not just from his girlfriend and best friend, but from the broader circle he once trusted. Invitations to hangouts stop coming. His phone buzzes less and less until it falls quiet entirely. The friendships he thought were unshakable crumble with frightening ease, leaving him isolated in a way that feels almost surreal. He begins to wonder if loyalty means less to everyone else than it does to him. What stings most is not the loss of the group, but the realization that when tested, few were willing to stand by him. The silence of his evenings becomes louder than ever, and the isolation begins to carve away at him piece by piece. The collapse of Ethan's personal life bleeds into his professional one with a merciless persistence.